Sports Talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the host of Waddle and Silvy on ESPN 1000 and a former Bears wide receiver. Please welcome Tom Waddle to the program. Tom, it's great to have you on. How are you?
I'm doing well, John. Thanks for having me.
Tom, should the Bears acquire Carson Wentz?
No.
Why not?
Short and succinct, right? I mean, you think I would have learned after 25 years doing 4 hours a day, 5 days a week that, short answers don't work. But look, I think there are a number of reasons from my perspective. The first is I think he's broken at the moment. I think Carson, I think he can be fixed. I think there's still talent in there. But I think in the moment, I think he's broken, and I don't have any real faith that the brain trust and the powers that be up at Hallis Hall at this time have the capacity to fix him. And, I think it's been on display. I think whether it's Ryan swinging and missing with Mike Glennon, and then the trade up for Mitch that didn't work out, and then the trade for Nick Foles, which obviously Matt had a lot of influence on. I think that from a personnel decision perspective, it hasn't worked. And then, look, Matt deserves a lot of the blame for not getting more out of Mitch. So I don't think that they've done a great job identifying talent. I don't think they've done a great job of developing talent. And for those reasons, I'm not confident that they have the ability, based on their track record here in Chicago. Then I'm not comfortable and confident that they have the ability to fix Carson Wentz. And when you trade for Carson, John, you're going to have to give up some draft currency. I mean, it's not going to be a lot. But then, as far as I understand, you're going to have to assume 2 years and $47 million worth of contract space. Carson Wentz is not a savior. Carson Wentz, as I said, needs to be fixed, which means you need to surround him with talented players. You need to help him out. I have questions about their offensive line. I have questions about their passing game. I have questions about a lot of things that they're going to do offensively at this time. So I'm not interested in giving up the draft currency, albeit it won't be a first round pick. I'm not interested in tying myself into a guy that needs to be fixed for 2 years and $47 million. And I'm not convinced that the group up at Hallis Hall has the capacity at this moment to surround him with enough and to fix some of the issues that ail him right now. So after giving that really curt, short answer of no, I've just gone the complete opposite direction and give you a long-winded answer. But yeah, I'm pretty adamant about this. It's just not, I don't think this is the time and the place to make that move. I think Carson Wentz has a better chance of succeeding in Indianapolis. I think they're more equipped to help him. And I just don't see this as a fit that I would be an advocate of.
Tom Waddle here on Sports Talk Chicago. Tom, who's the better option then for the Bears at quarterback? What should they do for next year?
I would stand pat and do nothing, to be honest with you. I know that's not the popular opinion. Look, there's only one guy out there that I'd be willing to quote unquote mortgage the future for, and that's Deshaun Watson. But I think we all are in agreement that they don't have the currency to make that deal. So look, you could convince me that David Carr at the age of 30 was worth the 20th pick overall, but you're not going to get him for the 20th pick and nothing else. So with all that in mind, look, John, I'm trying to create a situation because I lack faith at this moment. Maybe they'll change my mind in the 2021 season, but right now I don't have a lot of confidence in their ability to get this thing back on track on the offensive side of the ball. So with that as my perspective, what I would like them to do is do whatever the decision would be that would leave you with the least amount of baggage going forward, if that makes any sense. So I don't want to give up a bunch of draft picks that will then hamstring the next staff. And I don't want to be tied into somebody like Carson Wentz, who, if you do make the deal in 2021, looks like 2020, and he's still on your books for another $20+ million in 2022, and you have no interest in playing him, then you remain on this treadmill that has taken them nowhere.
How concerning is that to you? The fact that Pace and Nagy are expected to win next year, and because of that declaration being made, they may have to give up and mortgage the future, give up money, pay a contract that they don't want, and then have that probably stay for the next person who comes in. How concerning is that?
Very concerning for me is that you are letting guys who, quote unquote, are on the hot seat make decisions that will help preserve their jobs, but may hinder the organization going forward if they don't work. It's really, I think it's a dangerous approach. And it's one that does leave me more than a little bit concerned. Look, if they decide to package some things and move up in the draft and try to draft another young quarterback, this organization's tied to these guys for more than the 2021 season. I actually am one that believes, too, that there's more job security there than many believe. I don't believe this is, hey, you got to win 10, 11 games and get to the second round of the postseason or else everybody's fired. I don't buy that. I just think that my conclusion comes based on the evidence of what we saw in the postseason press conference, where they went out of their way to tell you how much they like these guys. And look, I like them too. Like I've had more access to Matt Nagy than I've had to Ryan Pace. Both are really good guys. But like I want somebody that has shown a consistency in terms of their competence. And right now, being good guys isn't enough. You've got to change the arc of the franchise. And I don't think that the ownership's appreciation for them being good men has equated to any type of success. So it does leave me, look, I'm a fan first before I'm an analyst here. This team runs in my blood. And I love a lot of the people up there, but by the same token, I've got to take a step back and look at the situation without bias. And yeah, I'm more than a little concerned, John.
Let me ask you this. After this season, did you want to rebuild or did you expect it?
I didn't expect a rebuild because, again, I had kind of a feeling that there was an appreciation for how much George and Ted liked Ryan and how much they like Matt. I get that. But, again, this is a $1 billion business. So I wasn't expecting change. I was hoping for it. I'm not going to lie. And again, I'm not a guy. I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm not a guy that is ever looking for a pound of flesh. I know how difficult it is to win consistently. The spotlight is on you. Yes, guys are handsomely compensated. There's a lot of perks that go along with being the head coach and the general manager of an NFL franchise. But with that in mind, I think that there's a shelf life. There's a shelf life to ideas. There's shelf life to a plan. And if it was up to me, based on their inability to find their quarterback of the future, I would have pivoted and gone in a different direction. I would have thanked them both for their participation and their diligence and their appreciation and their dedication. But I would have gone in a different direction, John, because of what you mentioned in the previous conversation was, like, these guys are going to be saddled with making decisions that ultimately, if they don't work out, are going to push this franchise back even further. And I just don't know that that's the best path for them.
Who's more to blame for this situation, Nagy or Pace?
Well, I would say Pace. I mean, I think that, Ryan's done a nice job in certain areas, especially defensively. I think he's done a pretty good job more times than not assembling a good defense. Offensively, though, I mean, as I talked, and not to be repetitive, I think he hasn't been able to solve the quarterback situation. He's totally ignored the offensive tackle position in terms of drafting guys high. The swings and misses, whether it's Kevin White or it's Adam Shaheen, you can go through the list. It's left them having to play catch up. And look, I was more disappointed after the 2019 season in the coach than I was the quarterback, because I never saw the coach do what I thought was right, which was tailor the scheme and the system to the strengths of what Mitch had shown you in previous years. And I thought he was stubborn, and he wanted Mitch to appropriately and efficiently run his system, as opposed to tailoring his system to the strengths of his quarterback. So, like, I was more disappointed in Matt than I was in Mitch. So, I've been critical of some of the decisions Matt has made. But I would say, to answer your question again, I would say their biggest issue, especially on the offensive side of the ball, is personnel.
How'd you feel about that, by the way, the whole Mitch and Nagy rhetoric? I mean, If you're a quarterback in the NFL today, you should be able to do what you want. You should have the freedom. It's much different than it was 20, 30 years ago. How do you feel about the fact that Nagy essentially put Mitch in a corner and told him, if you don't conform, you're not going to be the guy here?
Well, I think, there's that's a complex and nuanced answer because, like, I know I think, I don't want to make any assumptions. I think that you've been a guy that thinks a lot of Mitch. And listen, that doesn't mean you and I are at odds. It just like everybody's opinion is valid and everyone sees different things. With that as kind of a backdrop, I would say, I don't think Mitch is the guy that you want to turn everything over to. I think he does need some guidance, and I think he does need some coaching, and I think you need to tailor things to him, and I think they finally did that at the tail end of this past season. So I don't think it was a matter of them not letting Mitch be Mitch. I think it was a matter of them asking Mitch to be somebody he's not. And that's where I was critical of Matt. Like, the first couple games of the 2020 season, I was like, all right, Matt got it. Matt looked at the film, he did some self-scouting, and he decided that the best thing to do is focus on running the football because most quarterbacks in this league are dependent and need the help of a running game.
Right.
So they're gonna commit to running the football. They're gonna use Mitch's ability athletically to get outside the pocket. I've always found Mitch to be more accurate outside the pocket than between the tackles, because he never looks comfortable there. And then if he doesn't trust what he's seeing, then his fundamentals and his technique breaks down, and then he finds himself in trouble. So getting him on the edge was always the right thing in my mind to do. So I think we saw some of that against Detroit. We saw some of it against the Giants. And then we saw what Matt's true intentions were, I think, halfway through the Falcons game, where Mitch wasn't playing well. But at that point, Matt kind of gave in to his desire, his lust to run his offense. So, like, I just think that I don't think they did him any favors. I think they left him out to, like, look, John, this is one of those situations where there's a lot of blame to go around from my perspective. There are moments when Mitch is fully responsible for his performance. But I thought in 2019, there were a lot of situations where Matt left him hanging out there and hung him out to dry, asking him to do things that A, he wasn't comfortable with, and B, he didn't have the complementary pieces in his offensive huddle to accomplish what Matt was asking him to do. So I saw them make some of those changes in the first couple of games, and I was like, yeah, he finally got it. Then obviously what happened. And then when Mitch came back, they went back to tailoring things to what he did well. They focused more on the running game. Obviously, they found some improvements on their offensive line. They solidified some things, and it worked. It worked better. So, but I don't think there's any doubt. There was never any trust. There wasn't any trust. You look back in time, and you watch the game plans, and you watch the situation, you watch the body language. This was a marriage made in hell. We talk about marriages made in heaven. This was a marriage made in hell, and I think it played out. And especially at the end of the year, you saw how the offense was limited against the Green Bay Packers, and the game plan was limited against the New Orleans Saints. And I think that told you everything you needed to know about whether or not going forward these two guys could coexist.
Tom Waddle here on Sports Talk Chicago. Tom, besides quarterback, what more do the Bears need to address for next season?
They've got to get better up front. Like, I like Sam Mustipher. I think they've found some things and some different combinations, but like I said, look, there are very few quarterbacks in this league that can transcend what's in that huddle and what's in front of them and be successful without some help. And they've got to focus on running the football until you find that quarterback that is able to do it without a whole lot of help running the ball. You got to get better at the line of scrimmage. So they've got to find some answers at tackle. I don't think you'll see them cut both Massey and Leno. I think it's very likely that they'll move on from one of them. They've got to save some money because the salary cap is coming down for 2021. So they got to fix their offensive line. They've got to commit to David Montgomery. Like, look, I'm not here to tell you that David Montgomery is the second coming of a healthy and younger, Ezekiel Elliott. He's not Walter Payton, but I'm impressed with him, and I'm a guy that believes you have to give him 20 touches a game. You've got to make a decision on what you're going to do on the edge with Allen Robinson. I love Allen Robinson. I don't know if you can afford, based on their salary cap situation, to either franchise him or sign him to an extension. They've got some serious questions that need to be answered there. But they've got to take a good, long, hard look at what's going on. We all focus on the quarterback position, and we should, because it's the most important position in all of professional sports. But in most instances, it's the most dependent position in sports as well. And they have not done a good job surrounding whoever's under center with enough talented players.
If Allen Robinson doesn't return, Tom, who's the quarterback going to throw to?
That's a great question. I like Darnell Mooney. I think he is a fantastic young player. I don't know what his ceiling is, but you can convince me he could be a solid 2 down the line. Anthony Miller was a guy that flashed. Everyone loved him in his rookie year in training camp, and I think you saw some really some very nice highlights from him. He was efficient. I think he had 7 touchdowns as a rookie, and the progress just hasn't been there. Like Cole Kmet has shown you that there's some talent there, but we don't know where his ceiling is either. I mean, if you move on from, you look at what the Vikings did, and I know it's not an apples to apples comparison, but the Vikings decided they were going to move on from Stephon Diggs. Right. But what did they do? They used a first-round draft pick on Justin Jefferson, and in a lot of ways, they got comparable production for an eighth of the price. So if they decide to move on from Allen, they're going to have to spend a pretty high draft pick on a wide receiver that can pick up some of that slack. Does it have to be the 20th pick? Maybe not, but you better be able to find somebody at least in the second or third round that you can count on. Look, I'd love to bring Allen back. I think Allen's an underrated player. Is he a guy that can consistently take the top off of defense? No, but he's got as good a hands as there are in the league. He's a great route runner. He's a winner. He's a quality player. I would love to see them bring him back. I just don't know with their cap situation what the capacity is for them to be able to squeeze him in.
What's the more important need, would you say, offensive line help or wide receiving help?
I'd go with the offensive line. Look, I got to my preference, as we talked a moment ago, would have been to kind of rebuild and change.
Right.
I don't think this team is on the cusp, and I may be in the minority there. I don't believe, like, if you go back and look at the 2019 season, they were an 8-8 team. They beat some crappy teams that were playing some quarterbacks that really. They played David Blau, they played Jeff Driscoll, they played Sean Mannion. And this is, I'm not trying to drill those guys, but, their 8-8 season in 2019 felt more like a 6-10 year. This past year, they did the same thing. They beat up on some of the weaker teams, especially down the stretch, and they struggled against the better teams. So my perspective, I guess, is what I'm saying is I think they're further away than maybe they do. So I would look at more of a rebuilding approach. And for me, look what the Colts did several years ago. They solidified that offensive line. And that's what I would do. I would spend my draft currency on trying to find some core players that make you better down the road. They're probably going to look for more of a quick fix because there's an urgency for them to win and protect their job security. But if it was up to me and nobody's calling me and asking my opinion up at Halissaw, I'd zoom out. I'd take my lumps. I'd never condone losing, but I'd take a longer-term approach. And that's kind of the path I would go. And look, I get it. In this league, you can win quickly, but I just don't think – I think this team is in great need of finding some long-term answers that may push you back a little bit initially.
What about defensively? What do they need there, do you think?
Well, they need I think what they need is their marquee players to be more productive. I had somebody that I trust more than anybody in this industry and in the league, who looked objectively at Khalil Mack and said, look, he's a great player. But my guy says that, he's concerned that they use him too much. And I know what some people think. Look, he's one of the highest paid defensive players in the league. You can't play him too much. But when there's diminishing return, maybe you do have to watch his snap total. Akeem Hicks has been one of the most underrated, but one of the most accomplished players, I think, on defense in the league in the last couple of years. You got to gauge how much he's got left in the tank. All full disclosure, I was a fan of the Robert Quinn signing. I think his win rate as a pass rusher with the Cowboys was as good or better than anyone in the league. And I've seen him do some good things. I don't know what the situation was with him. Some people thought he came in with an injury. I don't know that to be true, but all I know is you didn't get enough from him. So listen, it starts with the guys that you're paying handsomely. They've got to be more productive than they have been in the past. I do believe that they're going to have to possibly move somebody or move on from someone to create some cap space. I think that currently they're up against the cap or they're over the cap. And the only way that you're going to be able to add some guys is if you actually kind of rearrange some of the things. So Eddie Jackson needs to play better. Jalen Johnson needs to continue to develop. I'd like to see them bring Gibson back. I thought he was one of their best, if not their best, most consistent player in the secondary. Again, I don't know that there's massive changes needed. You've got to decide who you can afford and who you can't afford. I like Eddie Goldman. His return will help. I like Bilal Nichols. He's a guy that I would want in the mix because he's young and he does some really good things. But you got to get better play out of the guys that are taking home the majority of the salary.
So, Tom, with all of this being said, what's your expectation for the Bears next year? Your way too early expectation.
They're an 8-8 team, John. They've been an 8-8 team for the last several years. They're good enough to beat the bad teams, and they're not good enough to beat the good teams. That's on full display. As I mentioned earlier, in the last 2 seasons, they've had 3 wins against teams that ended the season with winning records. They beat the Minnesota Vikings twice in 2019. In the first game, Mitch got hurt early in the first quarter, and Chase Daniel came in, and the Bears defense destroyed Cousins and the Vikings. I think they held them less than 10 points. The second game against the Vikings was week 17. Vikings had already clinched a spot, had nowhere to move in terms of up in the seedings. They played their backups. In 2020, the only win they had against the team with a winning record was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Tom Brady forgot what down it was at the very end. If he knows that's 3rd down and not 4th down, if you see the back that's creeping out of the backfield in that play, and I know you're a football junkie, you probably know what I'm talking about. If he just hits the check down, it's a 1st down.
Right.
And they're in field goal range, and they probably lose that game. So, I mean, the moral of my story is that, again, the history of this team over the last 2 years has been that they beat the bad teams, they lose to the good teams, which usually means you're an 8-8 team. And I don't see anything currently that would lead me to believe that they're going to get out of that pattern.